350 years ago this month, the most devastating fire in the capital's history destroyed most of the City of London and 80% of its churches at the time, including St Paul's Cathedral. Some saw the Great Fire of London as an act of God. Others saw it as a deliberate act of religious terrorism. Most were just looking for someone to blame. As well as exploring the religious responses to the Inferno of 1666, I also discovered the magnificent churches designed by Sir Christopher Wren that formed the heart of the new London that rose from the ashes. September 1666, and the Great Fire of London has brought the city to its knees.
All the sky was a fiery aspect, like the top of a burning oven. The noise and crackling and thunder of the impetuous flames, the shrieking of women and children, the hurry of people, the fall of towers, houses and churches was like a hideous storm.
Well, that was the harrowing, very graphic account by Christian John Evelyn in his diaries as he watched the devastation unfolding. And using biblical imagery, he described the scene as a resemblance of Sodom or the last day. So plainly, he thought that it felt like the end of the world. It all began here on Pudding Lane, as historian Kate Williams explains.
Well, it seems like the most unassuming city street, but we're pretty much on the site of Thomas Farriner's bakery, except he said, it wasn't me, it was nothing to do with me. And then the fire raged for 4 days, and then it ended in Pie Corner. And because of pudding and pie, those food references, lots of Londoners said it was God's punishment for the sin of gluttony.
Well, we've already heard that people worried that it was apocalyptic. Is that really what they thought?
People were absolutely terrified. So you've got these tiny houses, all made of wood, up in flames within a matter of hours. This whole area was one firestorm, and simply people couldn't escape. They dashed down to the Thames. That was no good because it was all on fire there. And the peak was when St Paul's itself goes on fire, which everyone has thought was safe because it was made of stone. But there was wood scaffolding and a few embers, and the whole place was flaming. And imagine the seat of Christianity, heaven on earth, the great St Paul's, is up in flames. So it really was terrifying. It was like the fires of hell. And what made people really panic was the date. It was the year 1666, and in the book of Revelations, 666 was the number of the beast.
After the flames were finally quenched, an Act of Parliament ordered that a monument was constructed to, as they put it, preserve the memory of this dreadful visitation. Thousands of Londoners walk past this every day and probably never wonder why it's here.
Well, this monument marks the position of the very first of the 87 churches that was burned in the Great Fire. So it's a monument to the city that was burned, the churches, and all the sacrifice that the people made.
So, in the aftermath of the fire, what was the general mood?
The belief was that the Catholics had caused it. They were seen as these religious terrorists. And this is what actually was inscribed on the monument. So in 1681, on the side, it said that the fire was caused by a popish frenzy which has not yet been quenched. The inscription wasn't lifted off until 1830, after the Catholic Emancipation Act. So the Catholics were blamed for the Great Fire of London for 150 years.
So was it possible for anything to quell those rumours and stop the bloodshed?
Charles II put out a statement saying it was an act of God, not a papist plot. And on top of this, he said, we all must atone for our sins. There must be a day of atonement, a day of fasting, and we all must say sorry for all the things we have done.
The Great Fire of London changed the medieval city forever, destroying hundreds of acres, burning more than 13,000 houses and most of the city's churches. But out of the destruction came opportunity as bids came pouring in to rebuild the city. And there is St Paul's, the masterpiece of the man who landed the job, Sir Christopher Wren.
Christopher Wren was this amazing polymath. He was a mathematician, a physicist, an astronomer, and an architect. And he was a great friend of the king and, of course, a devout Anglican. And what he really wanted to do was really put his stamp on London and to leave the fire behind to create this brand new forward city.
So in some ways, St Paul's was the symbol of the new city.
Well, the burning of old St Paul's was so terrible, so cataclysmic, no one had expected it. So the new cathedral became the symbol of this new forward-facing London. And what I really love is that the symbols of the fire are on the outside. So there are gilded flames, and also there's this great phoenix, and underneath is the motto, Resurgam, I shall rise again.
So while these grand churches were being built, what about ordinary people who'd lost not just their churches but their homes?
The ordinary people had lost so much in the Great Fire, and what you see after the fire is a real surge in religious worship. People are desperate for something like that never to happen again. And also, they've seen the fires of hell and they really, really don't want to go there.
Wren's redesign of over 50 London churches transformed the skyline forever. One church hidden amongst today's offices is St Stephen's Walbrook.
Oh my goodness, what a surprise!
Isn't it incredible? It's such an amazing church. And it really, it was so significant to Wren, basically because it was his own local parish church. He lived just round the corner at 15 Walbrook, and it was also the church where the Lord Mayor worshipped. So this one, he really wanted to get right.
So what can you see here that tells us something about the character of the man? What was important to him?
What's so important to him is space and light and also geometric shapes. So these shapes we've got up here, these fantastic windows. And of course, what's the most striking about this church is the absolutely fabulous dome, the prototype for the dome of St Paul's. This is the first dome church in England, and to Wren, this is the way of celebrating God.
So what a huge amount that man achieved. Did he live long enough to see the end result?
Wren lived till 91, and the whole skyline of London, it was all about churches, and that was what they really wanted to show after the Great Fire, to have churches dominating the skyline, that every time you looked at the skyline, all you saw was the churches, because for Wren, the most important part of rebuilding London after the Great Fire was celebrating the glory of God.